We gonna play the game, the PlayStation all day, with the Metal Gear Solid to Tekken 3, and from Omega Boost to Resident Evil. Just play for the fun, cause we got it going on.
Hello everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about a game that I've been playing for the last couple of weeks. A really fun video game from the makers of City of Heroes and City of Villains, Gazillion Entertainment. Now the game is really exciting, and it lets us delve into a universe that a lot of us have always wanted to. And the game is called Marvel... Oh. I'll be right back. Alright, that's better. So, like I was saying, the game is called Marvel Heroes, and... Hero. One more time. I'll be right back. Alright, much better. So, the game is Marvel Heroes, and it's what's known as an aRPG, or an action RPG. These are games that are basically just point, click, and kill stuff. And the biggest aspect of it is very frequently collecting a lot of loot. The most frequently cited, the most commonly used game of this type is actually the Diablo series. Diablo 1, 2, and now 3, most recently obviously. And I personally was a huge fan of Diablo 2. I played it for hours and hours and hours throughout middle and high school. It was a great game. It was a lot of fun. And one of the designers of Marvel Heroes actually worked on Diablo, and that's why they are so very similar. So one of the biggest things with these types of games is they can really be easily confused with MMORPGs, or MMORPGs, or massively multiplayer online RPGs. Things like World of Warcraft or Star Wars The Old Republic, things like that. Those are more geared towards the really large groups, enormous numbers of people working towards a common goal at the exact same time. So things like the massive 40-man raids in World of Warcraft and things like that. But in the end, it's really sort of semantics as far as if something is an action RPG or a MMORPG. But the biggest thing are those raids, the really large parties. So essentially for Marvel Heroes, I come at it from a perspective of somebody who is by no means an expert on anything. I've only been playing the game for a few weeks, and I've barely read any of the comic books. My extent is I read a few comic books in the 1990s, and I watched the X-Men animated series, which I happen to really like. But either way, so it's not really a completely outsider perspective, but mostly I'm coming at it from a perspective of, is it fun? A lot of the inside jokes, a lot of the characters in the game, I recognize, I understand a good portion of it, but some of it I just have no clue what's going on. But that's really the idea, and again, where I'm coming from is it fun for somebody who really doesn't have a whole lot of knowledge, and basically how much knowledge do you need, and in the end, how much fun is it? So with that, I wanted to start with just the general idea of playing through a comic book, because that's really what you're doing. And I believe that Gazillion and Marvel did a wonderful job of recreating sort of the feel of a comic book. The way that the story progresses is actually very unique in that it uses what they call motion comics as cinematics, where you have very little or no movement, and it sort of uses like the Ken Burns effect, where it just zooms in or out on a random point in a single scene, or just sort of pans around. But it seems like the comics are moving, and I think that art style is almost necessary for a game like this, because that's how you really bridge the transition from being a comic book world into a world that you can play online with all your friends and all that kind of stuff. And on that note, with all the heroes and the characters and everything, there are quite a few heroes. I believe as of now there's 28 or 29. Which is really exciting, and one of the greatest things is that Gazillion is adding heroes pretty much all the time, very frequently at least, which I'll get to in a little bit. But the best thing is, like I said, I've only played one hero all the way through, who happens to be Human Torch, and I've played a couple other characters a little bit, but not very much. But from what I've heard, what I've seen, what I've read, all that I'm hearing is how really great and unique each individual character is. And it's sort of what you would expect from reading the comic books, where the individual characters have powers that make sense for what they do in the comics. For example, Cyclops is one of the characters I'm playing now, and he has a lot of leader abilities because he is the leader of the X-Men and the X-Factor and a couple other things that I don't remember off the top of my head. But being a leader, he has things where he can help other teammates get experience, he can help revive teammates much more quickly, he can help teammates dodge better, all this kind of stuff, which is really, really cool. And then you have the just basic differences between stuff like ranged and melee characters. And do you use basic attacks, or do you use attacks that utilize spirit, as it's called, which is sort of like a mana from other games. You know, just all that kind of stuff, and it just makes each individual character very unique to play, even though you might have multiple ranged characters. With each one you play a little bit differently because they have different abilities and they're capable of doing different things, obviously. So it's a very unique game in that, very similar to League of Legends, where you've got, you know, all sorts of different characters you can play as, each and every one of which is unique, has unique items, all of that kind of thing. And it really doesn't, at least right now for me, again, it hasn't gotten boring yet, but talk to me later in a couple years and we'll see how I'm doing still. But moving on, one of the best aspects, at least in my opinion, for this game is that it is free to play. And that's something that tends to scare a lot of people because it's like, oh, well, it might be free to play, but if I don't give you any money, then my character is going to suck. And in this particular case, it's actually very, very unique in that if you don't pay any money, you're not necessarily at a disadvantage from a game perspective. Yes, people who pay certainly get more stuff. You get things like you can unlock characters more quickly. You can just pay and unlock characters. You can unlock new storage units. You can unlock things like health boosts or item drop boosts, things of that nature. But with all of those, you can get them simply by playing the game as well. It takes longer if you're playing free, but you can still do it, and it still works very well. One of the things is just before I started playing, they switched over from, they switched the way that you unlocked heroes. Before, you would go and you would have to find a hero token. It was actually a drop off of monsters, or mobs as they're called. And once you got the hero token, then you unlock that hero to play. But people were complaining about how terrible and like how low the drop rate is and all this kind of stuff, and it just doesn't work. And people are playing for tens and tens and tens of hours and going up to like 60 or 70 hours even and not getting a single hero. And, you know, when you're talking about 25 or 30 heroes, not getting a single one other than your starter kind of sucks. So Gazillion completely revamped the entire system, and they added what are called Eternity Splinters, where you can collect X amount and then you can unlock your heroes. And the way it works is a splinter drops every 4 to 8 minutes, I believe it is, depending on how good your gear is, if you can find them faster or slower. And essentially the way it works is better heroes are more expensive, not so great heroes or frankly less popular heroes are cheaper, or you can take a gamble and go with randoms. And I think that it's just a much better way to do it overall, because then anybody, whether you're paying or not paying, can get any hero. It's just that it's going to take the people who aren't paying longer. But as far as an actual game mechanic disadvantage, you really don't have one. As opposed to, for example, a lot of Facebook games, you know, like Farmville and all those kinds of things. If you pay money into those games, then you actually get significant boosts towards completing different objectives and all that kind of thing. Whereas with this, yes, you can get an experience boost and you level up your hero faster, but that just means that I have a little bit farther to go. And I think it really works in this case simply because everything is really not consolidated, but rather separated. It's the exact opposite, in that you have sections for individual ranges of levels of characters. So if somebody boosts off and they go to level 50 and you're still at level 20, well, that means that if you go into PvP, you're not going to be fighting them. You're going to be fighting people your level. Just things like that. And I think it just makes more sense. And with a game like this, it really works because very little of it is competitive. You don't have PvP unless you actually want to do PvP, as opposed to, again, certain Facebook games where if you pay money, then you get an advantage over opponents that you're playing against. So with that kind of thing, it just really makes sense in terms of free-to-play. One of the other biggest things that this game has really been good at, or rather Gazillion has been very good at, has been patches and updating the game. I mentioned earlier that even since I've started playing, 2 characters have been added, and they are Gambit and Ghost Rider, which is really cool, and they've done massive overhaul patches even. And it's really exciting, and it's really awesome to see a company that's really dedicated to keeping a game good, keeping it popular, and keeping people coming back. One of the best things about Gaz that I've heard of from other people who have played the games and from reading the forums is that Gazillion, if nothing else, is wonderful at responding to player feedback. They very, very consistently go to top players of specific characters and say, how are you doing? How's your DPS? How is your TDK? How is your TTL? All of these kinds of things. Like, do you think it's balanced with all the other characters? Would you, what would you guys change? And the thing is, they respond to it, and they do a wonderful job with it, which I think is a great formula to make a lasting game of this type. Because it's so easy for something like this to just crash and burn very, very easily, which is very unfortunate. And not only that, but just content in general. If you think about it, right now there are 9 chapters in Marvel Heroes as of when I'm making this video. And the 9th chapter was actually added right after I started playing. So content is relatively frequently added. I know there's a lot more planned, and one of the nice things is that since it's with Marvel, they're doing a lot of stuff as far as tie-ins with the movies, like Thor 2: The Dark World is why Chapter 9 was added, because Chapter 9 is all in Asgard, things of that nature. So in the end, it's hard to argue that there's a lot of good with this game, but the problem is it does have several things, several issues with it, most of which are actually fairly common with action RPGs, but some of which are specific to it. The vast majority of issues specific to Marvel Heroes are actually related to individual characters, being either under or overpowered, not having enough unique items for slots, things like that. That kind of stuff I really can't address because, again, I've played with very few of the characters, much less gone all the way to endgame. I can barely say that I've gone to endgame with Human Torch, the one character I've gotten to level 60. So that being said, I'm just going to focus on some of the major overall issues that, again, are related mostly to action RPGs in general. The first of which takes place in the locations such as Midtown Manhattan and X-Defense, where you have a large concentration of mobs that are solely there so that you can gain experience and loot, and money as well, credits. And the issue with that is when you get to the point where you've got a ton of bad guys converging on the same area, be it because they followed you or they all randomly spawned in the same spot, especially when you add in supervillains and things like that, everything can get to be a really big, giant flustercluck. And it can be very difficult to see not only where your own character is at, but where you're pointing yourself, if you're even pointing at a bad guy anymore, and particularly with the supervillains, because they have some really large particle effect attacks and things like that. But the only way that it really helps is if you have the larger enemies, because then you can actually see them much better. But again, that's something that really goes to pretty much any action RPG you play. If you don't have Flusterclux, then you don't have an action RPG, basically. So that's something that's sort of a personal taste. I really don't mind it that much, but it can be pretty bad in Marvel Heroes. It's definitely something that I'm okay with dealing with, though. And the other major thing that really plagues action RPGs is the repeating content. And again, this is something that really cannot be avoided, unfortunately, which in the end is fine, and it's just a matter of if you're okay with the play style, then you're okay with playing the game. In this particular case, the way that it works is you've got 3 difficulty levels, and you play through the story on each difficulty level, which increases the levels of the bad guys. So that way, as you level your character, you replay the story 3 times in order to eventually get to level 60, which is fine. But again, you're replaying through the same story, going against the same bosses, the same at the same time points, all of this kind of stuff. And same thing with X Defense and Midtown Manhattan. It can get somewhat stagnant, but I think one of the biggest strengths for this game is to combat that by way of having so many characters. Again, you have a lot of characters, you want to play all of the characters, and I think the fact that each character is so unique, it makes you want to replay the story, even though it is the same story again and again and again and again. And not only that, but with Gazillion adding new content fairly frequently, I think that's a really big help with getting people back into the story and making sure that they go through and they continue it and they complete it, even though it is the same thing over and over. Again, it is something that's really more action RPG specific, simply because that's the format of the game itself. And if you like that game style, if you like that play style, then it's certainly the game for you. And I think that it's definitely worth looking into at the very least. So, I guess just sort of to wrap up, as an overall impression for the game, again, coming from the perspective of somebody who has played games like Diablo and League of Legends and things like that on and off for many, many years, but coming into Marvel Heroes, relatively new to the comic book world, at least the so-called modern comic book world, and only playing for a few weeks, just overall impressions, I think that as far as aRPGs go, action RPGs, this is a wonderful example. Gazillion did a great job with it. They did a lot of things correctly, or at the very least they corrected things that they initially did wrong, which is arguably better than just starting it off well. If you listen to the feedback of your customers, then I think that makes for a better game company. One of the other great things that I didn't really mention too much is the way that you spend actual money, and with the microtransactions, I guess you could say. In-game you buy G, literally that's what it's called, is G, and using that you can buy your heroes, you can buy fortune cards, which is just a form of gambling to get specific items and things of that nature, or like I said, the rarity boosts, the experience boosts, that kind of thing. And I think Gazillion did a wonderful job with implementing those kinds of transactions. Because again, it is free to play just by yourself. If you don't really care about any of that kind of stuff, then that's perfectly fine. You'll eventually be able to unlock every single hero. It'll take a lot longer than if you pay for them, but you're going to do it. And not only that, but you will eventually get all of the best gear. It'll take you a lot longer than if you had a bunch of rarity item boost or rare item boosts, but you will get there. You'll be at the same level as the highest tier people, but, you know, it's going to take you more time, and it's not necessarily a direct competition with the top tier people, which is a wonderful way to do a game like this. And there's no doubt that Gazillion is making money off of this, which is wonderful, because that means that hopefully they'll continue to support it and continue to make new great content and add more and more characters. I know that they've planned, I believe it's somewhere around 100 total, which is pretty incredible, and especially considering that they've got 28 or 29 right now. There's a fair number planned just for 2014, and they've even started planning into 2015, which is wonderful to hear, because again, I like hearing that a game has that kind of longevity. So essentially, I guess the sort of final statement for this particular game is, if you like Diablo, then you'll probably like Marvel Heroes. It's not even necessarily that you need to enjoy the context of the comic books. It's just a good, solid aRPG. And incidentally, as a side note, since it was made by the same guy who made Diablo, they put in the awesome special level of the secret bovine sector. For those of you who remember way back in the day, with Diablo 2 they had the special cow level, and now it has been reborn in the form of Marvel Heroes. Although unfortunately you're not actually fighting cows, they're actually bad guys disguised as cows, which I think is actually kind of funnier. But in the end, like I said, to wrap up, just a great game, lots of fun, a good example of an aRPG, and a wonderful game to play whether or not you're a comic book fan. Because again, I'm not necessarily a comic book fan, but if you are, then you'll probably like it even more than I do. So with that, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed my video on Marvel Heroes, and I'll see you next time.
We're gonna play the game, the PlayStation all day, with the Metal Gear Solid to Tekken 3, and from Omega Boost to Resident Evil. Just play for the fun, cause we got it going on.